Hello, my name is Kason Quisenberry, and today I'm going to show you how to set up any character in Unreal 5 using their animation blueprint system. So you can have this default character and go to any character you want and play any animation that you want. All right, let's get started. Okay, so the first thing we're obviously going to want to do is actually import the skeletal mesh that we're going to be using for the character. Now, if you're watching this video, you probably already have a character in mind that you want to use. But if you're just watching this video as like a way to learn, there's a website called Mixamo. That's where I'm going to be getting the character I'm going to be using today. And it's an Adobe website that basically just has a bunch of free skeletal meshes. So you can just switch between them and you can get like a bunch of different characters. You know, you can get a mannequin, you can get more stylized, you can get more realistic, you can get a lot of different things. It also comes with animations that you can apply to any of these skeletons. So, you know, you can just click and add an animation to any of the skeletons. So you can use these if you want for a learning exercise, or if you can just use them in general because they are free to use from my understanding. So I'll put a link to that in the description, but if you already have a character or you're just following along with this video, don't worry about that. And let's get into the actual importation. So like I said, I got a character from Mixamo, so I'm going to pull that up. All right, so I got all my animations here, but most importantly, I have my skeletal mesh, which is in a T-pose. Now, technically, if you upload any animation, it'll auto make a skeletal mesh for you. So you could just upload animation, but personally, I just think it's better practice to have a T-pose or A-pose generic character that's not animated in for the initial skeleton because it's the more proper way to do it. So that's what this is right here. So I'm going to go into my character folder that I have in my thing. I'm going to specifically be doing a player character. However, this will work for NPCs or enemies or anything like that. This will work for any single animation blueprint that you need to make. But I'm just going to do the player. So let's go into our skeletal mesh, our skeletons folder. Let's drag in our skeleton. All right, now it's going to bring in all these things. So skeletal mesh needs to be clicked, import mesh, obviously. And then there's going to be this skeleton. Now this is going to be blank for right now because this is going to make the skeleton we need for this character. So don't worry about this. Everything else should be good. So let's just import all. Okay, now my character was textured, which is why you're seeing there's all of these different texture and materials these are going to auto make. Even if your character is not textured, it'll most likely auto make some sort of Lambert material that's going to be covering it. Which you can delete that and replace with your actual textures. But if your character is textured and you get all these, I'm going to move them into a different folder. So I'm just going to make a new folder, call it material, and then just get all these and drag them into this material folder. That way we have all our animations here, our material here, and our skeleton here. So let me open up the skeleton. So it's going to make three different things. It's going to make the skeletal mesh. It's going to make a skeleton. It's going to make a physics asset. You normally won't be messing with the physics asset unless you're doing something specific. So we're not going to worry about that for this video, but let's go ahead and open the skeletal mesh. So here we have the skeletal mesh. And as you can see, we have access to all of the different rig points. You can see every single point of the rig, every single bone. And then if we go to asset details, we can see the materials of the character. We can see some other information. Typically, you don't have to mess with these things too much. It's just going to be a lot of basic settings. But normally, you don't have to do anything, so I don't really go over them too much. And then over here we have a morph target, which you only need if you're doing a morph target. And then we have a preview scene, which basically you can have default animations if you just want to see them in here. And you can change the lighting and stuff like that. And you can change the environment background here, and you can change post-processing just to see what your skeletal mesh looks like in different scenarios. And so that's what you can do in the skeletal mesh editor. There's also the skeleton itself. So if we go here, we're going to basically get the same thing, except it's going to be just the different rig points. So we have all these. And the thing that's useful about this is you can edit, not edit the rig, but you can edit, how the points. So you can see here, I can move that foot there. I can go here, I can get the arm. I can move it up and down and around. And then hypothetically, or theoretically, what you could do here is you can animate it. So you can see there's this little record button, there's a pause button, and then there's a next to button. So hypothetically, you can make keyframes and animate using Unreal 5 and just a rigged character. Personally, I wouldn't recommend doing that because it's not a very good the animation tools are not very good, you're probably better off using something like Maya or Blender or 3D Max or something like that to actually animate your character in. But if you, really want to or really need to, you can, animate here. And when you hit this record button, it's going to ask where you want to put the animation, let you name the animation, and what frames you want the animation to be in. But again, I'm not going to go over it too much because I don't think it's a very good tool. There are other videos going over it if you are interested. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and import in all my animations. That way when I'm making an animation blueprint, I don't have to stop and import. So I'm just going to go to this little animation folder that I have within my character. And it looks like I already made 2 default folders. So let me go ahead and put walk into walk. Okay, so when this pops up, you're going to see it's going to be the exact same thing. However, we are going to want to select this and then select our skeleton here. Because if not, what will happen is it will make an entirely new skeleton every single time we make the animation, which isn't the worst thing because you can just, switch it after, but we don't want to just create a bunch of skeletons for no reason. So let's go ahead and just select that skeleton that we already made. That's also why I like to have the skeleton before the animations. That way, when you import the animations, it's the same process every single time. So, and make sure that this little thing, import animations, is checked to be true and the animation length is exported time. These are the default normally, but sometimes this just is checked false for some reason. It's a little inconsistent, but just make sure this is checked and make sure this is exported time. There's also some advanced settings, but I normally just use the default of these. I haven't really had an issue where I've had to go in and mess with these. So we're just going to leave that for default for right now. So let's import all. So as you can see, it also is going to make a bunch of different animations, but we don't want that. So what we can do is we can just go here, delete. Now it's saying that they're being referenced, but we already have the different materials, right? So we don't have to actually worry about that. So let's go ahead and force delete that. And as you can see, it made another skeletal mesh and it made another physics asset. We can go ahead and delete those as well. And then we have our walking animation. So here is the animation editor. As you can see up here, if you click this, we can get to our skeletal mesh editor. And if we click here, we can get to our skeleton editor. And we can also get to our physics asset if we go over here. But again, you don't really want to mess with that too much. So let's go ahead and go to our animation. So there are a couple different settings over here. And also you still have access to all the skeleton. You can see what animation you're doing right here. Again, here's the preview thing where you can affect lighting and environment, post-processing and stuff like that. But we're going to focus on the asset details for right now. So there's just a couple of different things that you can do within here. So first, there's interpolation. So currently it's using linear, which is what you're going to want most of the time. But there's also step interpolation, which it doesn't seem like, visually doesn't seem like it's doing that much, but it's mostly doing stuff on the back end. Linear is typically going to be less expensive from my understanding. So next thing we have the rate scale, so we can see how fast this animation plays. So, so yeah, we can make it to where he's walking way, way fast, or we could do something where he's walking in slow motion. So this is going to affect it globally. So every instance of this animation is going to change. However, you can change how fast an animation plays in a couple different spots. So you're not locked into whatever this rate scale is. You might as well just keep it at 1 because you can change it, anywhere. You can change it from a couple different places. So let's just keep it at 1. The other thing is this loop variable. So this is the default behavior of if it loops or not. However, I find that this doesn't really do anything, honestly. Half the time, there's another loop checkbox that'll show later that you have to click for it to work. But let's go ahead and set this to true. So here it just says, what skeleton is and has some other information like that. And then if we go down, we have what's called root motion. Now, normally you're just going to want to have it to be use normalized root motion scale. And what this is referring to is the root of the mesh, which for this character is the hips. And for you, it might be the hips or the spine or something like that. But you can get into scenarios where you need to click this one because let me show you using Mixamo. So if you see here, the character is currently running through the space, which is not what you want for a video game typically, because if you remember from another video, the way that a character works is that its collision is inside of this capsule. And so if the animation is actually moving throughout space, they will run through the capsule and outside of the capsule. So they'll no longer be in the collision. And what happens is this wonky effect where you run outside the capsule and then you get snapped back inside the capsule. Right, so and if you're doing mix mode, the way to fix this is just put it in place and then running in place. And also, if you're animating something like Blender or Maya or something like that, you are going to want to animate every single animation in place so that they're not actually moving through the capsule. However, if you have an animation that is moving through space, you're going to want to check enable root motion. This is basically going to cancel it out. You might also have to click force root lock as well. So if the animation is being funky and it's going outside the capsule, just do these two. Theoretically, we could do it now, but it won't really do anything. So let's just, and as you can see, it changed the animation a little bit, but that's because this animation is done correctly for video games. So the best thing to do is just to have it to where the character is animated in place. But worst case scenario, just check those two. And then I think the rest of the stuff isn't very important, so we're going to go ahead and move on. So real quick, I'm just going to go ahead and import all the animations, but if you just follow the step for this one for all of them, you should be good to go. So the next thing we need to do is actually make our animation blueprint. Now, what an animation blueprint essentially does, it is the code that is going to tell your skeletal mesh what animation state it needs to be in. So we need to code it to where it understands when it should be playing the idle animation and when it should be playing the walk animation and when it should be playing the jump animation and different things like that. Now, in terms of organization for the content browser, there are a couple of different places you can put it. You can put it right here and just make a new folder called animation blueprint. You could also, in the overall one, make one here. You could also put it in the blueprints folder because technically it is, a blueprint as, in the name. But for me, I like to put it just by where my animations are inside of whatever character it is. That way that, if I need to be focusing on animation stuff, my animation blueprint is right by my animation. Called this blueprints. And so if I'm working on this, I can just easily go over here and mess with stuff. So what we're going to do is you're going to go down here to animation, and then you're going to go to over here where it says animation blueprint. Now it's going to ask you what skeleton it wants because every single animation blueprint has to have a specific skeleton into it, which is why you have to import everything first. Now, because you have to have a specific skeleton, I recommend that you get your rig or skeletal mesh completely finished before you make the animation blueprint, because if not, you're going to have to remake it. If there's even a single, bone that's changed in your rig, or even if they add, IK controls, or they edit this or they edit that, it's going to make an entirely new skeleton. You're not going to be able to use the same skeleton as before because they are different. So you basically have to remake your animation blueprint. Now, if that's something that if you just want to make a proxy one or just you want to test it out using the old version, that's fine. Just know you are going to have to remake it. But I'm going to select this boss skeleton since that's what I'm working here, and I'm going to create. Now, the way that you would name this is ABP for animation blueprint, and then just name your character. So I'll just call mine the boss. You also do player character, something like that as well. All right, so let's open this up. And this is going to be UI for this. So here we can see our character and we can see, what they're doing. If you hold Alt, you can, spin them around to see exactly what's happening. There are a couple, this is like basically the blueprint graph from the blueprint. So as you can see, we have functions, we can have macros, we can have variables, we can have event dispatchers, just like a typical blueprint over here. This is a very specific thing that I'm not really going to go over for this video. Over here we have our details. So as you can see, here's the root motion that I was talking about. We also can put in some animations for previewing. And again, we can change the lighting environment and post-processing just to get a good feel for it. The next thing is we have the anim previewer. So this just allows us to change some values to see like how it affects our preview, but it won't affect the entire thing. Here we have the asset browser. So here are all the animations that are referenced in the skeleton. We have this right here, and so basically we can drag and drop these. We can drag this in here, and we have access to all the animations that is connected to the skeleton, which is pretty cool. So here we have the outpose node, and basically this is going to be what is sending what pose the character should be in to the actual character mesh. So if I drag this here and hit compile, you'll see that he'll automatically go into whatever animation we have here. So I could, pull in another one. However, they're never going to be able to change animations like that, which is where the actual coding process comes in. So this is the animation graph. This is going to be where all the animation code and stuff lives, but there's also an event graph that you see here. Now, what we're going to do with the event graph is we're going to set that up first, because that is going to set up variables that we are going to need for the animation blueprint. So this is where you're going to basically have all the variables that you're going to get from your player character. And so let's go ahead and set that up now. So these are going to be the first two nodes that are already going to be in your event graph when you open it up. We're going to ignore this for right now. So I'm going to go up here and I'm going to make a different node. I'm going to make a node called Event Blueprint Initialize Animation. And this is essentially going to function as your event begin play. So once your animation blueprint starts, it will run whatever's after this line of code. So it's basically like an event begin play. So I'm actually going to move this try get owner up. And basically what this is going to do is it's going to try to get a reference to your actual skeletal mesh. What this is going to do is it's going to get a reference to your skeletal mesh. So off of this, I'm going to cast to our character. So this is going to cast to the actual blueprint for your character. So for me, that's going to be third person character, but for you, it's just whatever you named your player character or your AI character, whatever character you're making this animation blueprint for. And so we have that here, and I'm going to promote this to a variable. And that's a long name, so I'll just change this to player ref. You can call it, whatever your character's name is, ref, or AI ref, or something like that. And so I just want this so I have a reference to my character that I can pull from at any time. But we need something else specifically from our character that we're going to be using a lot, which is character movement. This is the part of the code that calculates a lot of how the player moves, and we're going to need that for our animation blueprint. So I'm going to get character movement, and I'm also going to promote this to a variable, character movement. And so now I have our character movement as a variable as well. Now let's go ahead and just comment this. Setup get needed references. Next, we are going to use our event blueprint update animation. And what this essentially works as is an event tick. Because every single frame that your character is moving, we need to find out the variables that we need so we can change this animation state. So if we have this character here and we're hitting W, right, to move them, the second that the player hits, takes off their hand on W, we need to change the animation state. So we need to do that frame by frame, know exactly what animation state it's in, because the player can be, moving like crazy, or they could just be making fast movements. They could be making fast movements. So we need to calculate what animation the character needs every single frame. And that is what this node's going to do. So an important thing to note is every single character that has an animation blueprint is going to be ticking, is going to be doing something every single frame. So you just might want to watch out for having, 1,000 characters in a scene or something like that. But this is also a reason why we want the rest of our blueprints to be very optimized and not use event tick as often as possible, because everything with the character blueprint has to tick, right? So try to use event ticks and other blueprints sparingly, and try to optimize the rest of your game. That way the characters and the amount of characters shouldn't be an issue for performance. Now, technically we could have done this again on here, but again, we wouldn't want it to cast to something every single frame, which is why we did this up here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag in my player ref. I'm going to right click on this little node here, and I'm going to convert to a valid get. This is going to make sure that the player reference is valid and that we actually have a character that we are referencing. That way we avoid getting an error. The next thing I'm going to do is make a sequence, because I'm going to break up everything here into different sections. So the first thing we need to figure out for our character is when our character is moving and how fast our character is moving. That way we can determine what animation state they need to be in. So let's get our player ref here, and we're going to drag off here and get velocity under transformation. And that is just going to tell us how fast our character is moving. And so let's promote this to a variable. And we're going to call this just velocity. You also call it, character velocity or something like that, but I'm just going to call it velocity. Connect that here. Now, the thing about that is that it doesn't actually give us the best example of how fast our character is moving, because velocity is basically speed plus direction, but we don't really want to worry about the direction for some of the variables that we're setting. So what we're going to do is we're going to get vector length xy, and this is actually going to give us a more direct example of what the speed of the character is. So we're going to promote this to a variable, and we're going to call this speed. And we're going to set that here. And that's going to do it for the top part of our sequence. Let's go ahead and just move this all, actually, yeah. Let's go ahead and just move this all down real quick. So the next step is to use these variables we made and then check if the character is actually moving. So what we're going to do is we're going to drag speed here. Going to get speed, and what we're going to check is if it's over a certain threshold. Now you might want to play around with this number, but for me, usually 3 is good. So basically they have to move at 3 meters per second in order to register that they are moving, which is going to be, most time any character moves. Again, you might need to mess with this number, make it smaller or bigger depending on what sort of character you're going for. But for me, 3 is going to work. The next thing I want to do is get my character movement. And what I'm going to do is get current acceleration. So off of current acceleration, we're going to get not equals 0. Now there is this one that is basically 100, just comparing a vector to a vector, but we want to just get the normal not equal. That way we can compare it against a vector and just a float. So we just want to make sure that nothing equals 0. Because if our current acceleration is above 0, that means that we are, of course, moving. And so what I want to do there is get a Boolean check, or an AND Boolean, and then we're going to want to check both of these. Now, the reason that we do both these instead of just one is that we account for more edge cases by doing this. Most likely, most of them are going to would be handled if you just did this one or if you just did this one, but this accounts for a lot of different edge cases. So then we're going to promote this to a variable, and we're going to call this is moving, because this is determining whether a character is moving or not. And so we're going to drag that here. And then the next one, so you're going to need these two for any single character that you're ever going to have, because most likely your character is going to have to move. Unless you're doing a very different type of animation system or very different type of character. But for the most part, if they're moving, you need these. This next one, however, is going to be only if your character is going to be jumping or falling. So you don't have to follow along if your character is not jumping or falling, but I'm just going to go ahead and do this. So what we're going to do is we're going to get character movement. We're going to get is falling. And then we're just going to promote this to a variable and call it is falling. And this is just going to see whether or not our character is falling. It's pretty self-explanatory. And this is going to be used for the jump. Because if our character is falling, that means that they are in the air, and we need to account for that. Because it is a little complicated, I'm going to go ahead and just break it down. So first we're going to get a reference to our character and to our character's movement so we can get variables that are important to determine our animation state. We are then going to double check that we actually have a reference to the character that is valid. We are then going to get our character's velocity and speed. This way we can determine whether or not the character is moving. We are then going to use the variables that we made up here to determine if the character is moving, because if their speed is above a certain threshold and they are accelerating because acceleration not equals 0, that therefore means the character is moving. And so we are then going to set that variable to use for later. And then finally, if we have a character that's jumping or falling, we are going to just get is falling to see what state they are in. So now let's go back to our AnimGraph up here. Back to our output pose. It's going to determine what pose we need to be in. We're going to want to make two things here. The first is we're going to want to get a state machine, which I'll go over a little bit more in a second, but let's go ahead and we can rename it to whatever we want. So I typically like to just do the character's name machine. So I'll just do the boss machine or state machine or whatever. Now the next node that we're going to want to make is we're going to drag off here and we're going to do default slot. And we're going to plug that into our out pose. Now let me explain what's going on here. So the state machine is going to determine each individual state that your character is going to be moving in. So for example, if we go back here, right, this idle pose is a state, this walk is a state, and it's basically going to determine which state you need to be in. However, there are most likely going to be times when we want to play an animation that is not included in the state machine, which I'll go over that a little bit more later. But if there's ever a time we don't want to play an animation in the state machine, we need this default slot. That way that we have if we want to play an animation that's not in our state machine, we need this default slot basically so that the state machine isn't freaking out. Because the state machine is always going to be running, always trying to figure out what state the character needs to be in. And so if we ever want to run something that is not in the state machine, we need a place for the state machine to just say, hey, do nothing. So when we need to run a different animation, we're going to go to the slots, this default slot, and just do absolutely nothing. Now, even if you have your animation system is only going to be walking and being idle, and you don't think you're going to need any other external animations, go ahead and just put this here. It's just good practice, and it's just like a good fail safe in case something comes up, and it can solve some potential edge cases for us. And we don't need to do anything with this anymore. This is all set up. We don't need to do anything with this anymore. This is all set up. We now need to set up this state machine. This is going to be the start of the state machine. And now what we can do is we can drag off this. As you can see, there's not much we can do here. There's a conduit. There's a state alias. But we don't really need to worry about this too. The main thing we're going to be doing is new state. So this is going to be our first state. I'm going to call this idle. And we have an animation state now. Now, if we double click this, we're going to have a node that's output animation pose. And basically that is just going to be communicating with this. So we go here, let's open up idle. And again, all your animations are over here. So I'm going to drag in the idle that I got. Now I'm going to plug this in here. I'm going to compile. And now you can see that my character over here is animated within this idle animation. And if we go to the state machine, we see that this is running right here. Now, as you can see, this says 100% active. Again, every single character is going to be ticking. So just be aware of that. Now, one quick thing before we move on, like I said earlier in the video, there is a way to set the default to loop, but unfortunately sometimes that just doesn't work. So the actual way to make sure that your animation is looping properly, because as you can see, he's not looping currently, he's still. If we compile, he'll play the animation, and then once the animation is done, he just stops, which we don't want. So what we can do is we can scroll down here and we can just select this boolean to be true, which will be loop animation. And now he will just constantly be looping. The other thing is there is a play right here as well. So here's another place you can change it so we can make it to where it's, he's moving all around, going very quickly. But you can also change that within the actual blueprint of the character as well. But just make sure you have loop animation ticked to be true or your animation will not loop. Now, the next thing that we're going to do is just set up the walk. So we're going to drag here. We're going to add state. And we're just going to call this moving for right now. And you see that there's this little thing here that basically is called a transition or transition rule. And so we need something to tell the code to go from idle to go to moving. So if we double click this, you see that we get another thing here. And basically it's just going to be a Boolean check to check whether or not it's true that we're moving or whether or not we're not moving. And so luckily we already have the variable for that. So all you have to do is plug in is moving. However, if we do that right now, all the character could do is go to idle to moving. It would never be able to go back to idle, which we want. So we're just going to draw another arrow to go here, which is going to create a transition. And we double click and we have the same thing. Now what we want to do is get our is moving. And we just want to put a not Boolean. So if we're not moving, we want to go back to idle. So if we're idle and we start moving, we're going to go to our moving animation. If we're moving, then we stop, we're going to go back to our idle animation. Using the default character as an example, we can see that if we move them at a slower speed, that they do sort of like this walking animation, right? So we're moving them very slowly and they're doing this animation, but if we move them fast, they go into a run animation. So you're most likely going to want something like that. Now you don't necessarily have to have that, but it is just a good thing to have, having a walk and run animation that you can blend between. So there's two different ways that you can do this. Is that one way is to just have it to where we go to our state machine and then we have, a walk state and then we have a run state. and we have them as two different states. And what we do is we basically, for the transition, would just say, is our speed over a certain threshold, right? If our speed is 300, then let's change to our running animation. If our speed is less than 300, let's be walking. But that is going to not look as good. It's going to be a little bit more jarring. So we're going to create what's called a blend space, which is basically just going to take two different animations and blend between them. Which, to clarify a little bit, if we see here, this is an idle animation, and if I move the character, you see that they blend into the run, but this is blending between two different states completely. But what we're going to set up is a blend space, which is going to blend between two different animations in the same state. So I'm going to go to my content browser. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to animations. I'm going to make a new folder called Blendspaces. I'm going to open this up. And what I like to do is I like to have the two animations that I'm blending between in the thing. So I'm just going to, and so I'm then going to like name this blend space because, this is going to be our movement blend space. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to open this up, and then I'm going to get the two animations I'm blending between, which are, for me, is going to be run and walk. And I'm just going to put that into our blend space here, just so those animations are in the blend space and I know where I need to go to edit them. And so then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go to animation, and I'm going to go to where it says blend space. And again, you have to select a skeleton. I'm going to select the one I've been using, and we're going to call this BS for blend space _ movement. Which also, it's probably good to name it your character. So let's go boss movement, just in case you have multiple different characters that have different blend spaces. So we're going to open this up, and it's going to look like your typical, animation skeletal thing, except it's going to have some different asset details, and it's going to have this little graph here. And what this graph does is basically going to determine what state or what animation it should be playing based on a variable. So as you can see, there's a horizontal and there's a vertical axis. Now for different things, you might need both, but for movement specifically, we only need one, the horizontal axis. So I'm just going to change this to speed, because our speed is going to be determining what state we're in and what state we're not in. So if you see, and this is under axis setting, by the way, which is over here. Don't worry about input interpolation. The default setting should be fine. And again, there's also the vertical axis if you need to edit that. But for this, we only need the horizontal axis. For most cases, you're probably only going to need the horizontal axis. It's only if two variables would affect what sort of animation you're in would you need both. Now for this, we have a minimum axis and a maximum axis. So the minimum, we're going to put whatever our minimum threshold to move is, which if you remember from our event graph, we put our minimal threshold as 3. So whatever you set this number to should be the minimum for this. So 3, and then the maximum axis should be whatever the max speed you are. So let's go to the blueprint we're working with our character. Let's go to character movement, and let's see what our max walk speed is. So our max walk speed for this character is 500 centimeters per second. Whatever your max walk speed is what you would put for here. So I'm going to put 500 right there. And so now let's actually drag in our animations. So first I'm going to need my walking animation. So this is going to be the walking animation. And up here you can set the variables. So I'm just going to set the vertical to 50. It doesn't really matter because again, we're not using it, but I'm going to set the speed to our minimum speed, which is 3. I'm then going to drag in my running animation. And we're going to do the same thing where we're going to set this to 50, just so it's on the same line. Again, it doesn't really matter. We're going to set this to 50. Again, it doesn't really matter. And we're going to set this to our max walk speed, which for me is 500. And so we have these two different points. Now, as it says here, you have to hold control to see the preview. And so when you hold control, you're going to get access to this little X thing. And we can go along our graph and see at what point our animations change. So as you can see, it's blending between these two animations. So at our max, we're going to be here. At our midpoint, we're going to be here, sort of this in-between state. And at our walking, we're going to be walking like this. All right, so now that we have that done, we're just going to save that. And we're going to go to our animation blueprint once more. Go to our state machine. moving. And as you can see, our blend space was added here because it counts as an animation asset. So we're going to drag that here, and then we're going to plug that in there. Now, as you can see, we have to enter the variables. Since we're not using the vertical, we can just leave that as 0, but we're going to get our speed variable and plug that in there. And so that is now all set up and good to go. Now, the next thing is going to be just now technically you could also put it in idle into this blend space. You could have made it to where if it was, speed was 0, we have our idle animation, and then blend between. Personally, I just don't think that really does much, like blending between these two, because like the change is almost instantaneous either way. So I just like to have them as different states to organize a little bit better. Now, an important question you might be asking yourself is, when do I use blend spaces? When do I, just use states? And, technically there is no correct answer for that. You could use blend spaces, for everything and have like a bunch of different variables, but that doesn't really make much sense. Or you can never use blend spaces if you don't want. For me personally, I think that if there's anything that is, super dependent on a variable, you might as well make it a blend space. So for movement, again, very much based on speed. So since it's tied directly to a variable and it needs to change between, I will go ahead and make that a blend space. But if something is, more of like a Boolean variable, then I'll just make it a state. But if it is a specific number that I can say, hey, I want this to be at this number, this to be at that number, I'll do it as blend space. And, it personally comes down to what you think is going to be best. So if you, feel free to play around with that, try to make certain animations blend space, certain not blend space, and just sort of get a good feeling for that. Next, I'm going to be setting up the jump for the character. Now, even if your character doesn't have a jump, I recommend watching this section just because I'm going to be going over some other tools that you might need to use for animation. So go ahead and just watch it. You don't have to follow along if you don't have a jump, but go ahead and just watch it so you can get some background information. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to set up 2 more states. So I'm going to add a state, call this start jump, and then I'm going to have another state called end jump. Now, it's important that you make sure your transitions are set up for every possible scenario, right? So you might be jumping while moving, but you also might be jumping while being idle. So we're going to want to set this up right here. But you also need to make sure that your transitions are set up correct, because you're never going to, go from start jump to one of these. You're going to always start jump to end jump. But again, for end jump, we're going to want to go to moving. But we're also going to want to go to idle, because we might, be jumping and not moving, or jumping and jump while moving. So as you can see here, we made a bunch of different transitions that we're going to have to fill in. Hopefully this isn't too complicated, but just to explain it, we already have these set up for is moving, is not moving. And then we have all these different transitions that I'm going to go through one by one real quick. So first we're going to go from idle to start jump. So all we're going to do is open this up, and we're just going to put in this is falling. Because if we are falling, that means that we are in the air, and we should immediately switch to the jump animation. And then just for simplicity's sake, I'm going to show you from start jump to end jump. All we're going to do is the opposite of that, and we're just going to get this not Boolean right here. So if we're not falling, we want to end our jump. And then we're also going to want to go here, and this is just going to be is falling as well. And so we have the 3 basic ones set up. So if we're idle, we're then going to check if falling and start jump. If we're moving, we're going to check is falling and then jump. Once we start the jump, we're going to see if we're ever not falling, we're going to then end the jump. Now, the only transitions we have left is going from end jump and either to moving or back to idle. So how do we do that? So I'm going to open this transition up. And so we're going to get a node called time, called get relevant time remaining, and then we're going to tie it to a specific animation, which is going to be our end jump. Now, what this basically does is this tells us how many seconds since we played this animation. So how many seconds into the end jump animation are we? And so and then what we're going to do is we're going to get a greater than. And so if we have ended our jump for a certain amount of time, we are then going to change the animation state. So let's say after 0.3 seconds, we are going to then go from our end jump to our jump animation. We're probably going to have to mess with this number, but this is the basic setup. So we're going to get how long have we played this animation, and then if it's over a certain length, we're going to change it. Now let's copy these nodes and then go from end jump to moving, and then we're just going to plug in the same thing there. All right, the next thing is to actually put in our jump animations. However, you might have run into however, you might notice is that we need two different animations. We need the jump start and the jump end. Now, personally, when I'm working with an animator, I will tell them specifically to make two different animations for the start jump and the end jump. But sometimes you might just get an animation that's all together because you download it online or the animator just didn't know that. However, we can make two different animations using Unreal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my content browser. I'm then going to open up animations. I'm going to go to my jump, open that up. I'm going to open this. As you can see, it's all one animation. Now, this jump animation also isn't very good. It's not going to look great, but the practices should apply. So I'm going to pause this, and so I'm going to figure out at what point, is the end of the jump, fully integrated. So as you can see here, we're jumping, and then there you go. So this is, just like going over like your animation. You can see how it is, and you can also play it, but you can use this to find specific points. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I actually don't like how long it takes to get in the anticipation, because that's just gonna take a long time for the player. So I'm going to go to about here, which is where the animation actually starts. Now I'm going to right click this. And as you can see here, there's what's called sequence editing, and you can basically edit the frame. So I'm going to remove frame 0 from 9. That way when we start the animation, he's immediately going to the jump and you won't have that awkward waiting period. So I'm going to do that. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to duplicate this animation. So let's duplicate this, and I'm going to call this one jump start. And then I'm going to name this jump end. All right, so in jump start, I'm going to go to, okay, so he's jumping, he's up, and he's in the air. And then I'm going to find out, okay, exactly where he starts to go down. So you can see he's in the air, he's in the air, he's in the air. And now he's starting to come back down about at frame 40 here for me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove frames 42 through 73. That way I just have this start animation. And then I'm going to go to the content browser, find my end jump. And again, it was around frame 40. So go to frame 40, it starts to go down. I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to delete frames 0 to 40. And that's going to give us our jump landing. And you can do this with any animation in Unreal if you need to remove frames or just edit, make several different animations from one animation. This is the way to do it. So now we have our two different animations. So inside jump start, I'm going to get our jump start, compile. Let's go back and make sure we save it. So I'm just going to connect this. And then I'm going to go ahead and do the jump end as well. And so that should be our basic AnimGraph right there. So again, we have our event graph, which is getting us all the variables we need for our AnimGraph. We then go to the AnimGraph and we have our state machine, which determines what state we're going into. We have the default slot for any edge cases, and then we have the outpose, which actually sends the pose. We then have all of our different animation states with transitions. Make sure that you double check all the transitions are filled out. It should give you an error if they're not, but just go ahead and make sure all of them are filled out. There's a lot of times where you're just going through and you forget one, and it can mess things up. So just double check your transitions. So now what we're going to do is we're actually going to set it up for our player character here. So here we're going to go here and see we have this mesh, our character mesh. We're just going to select that. And as you can see here, we have our new skeletal mesh down here, and we're going to select that. But as you can see, this is just the T-pose. This isn't connected to any animations. But we're going to set that up real quick. But we're also probably going to want to change our character capsule height just because he's a little taller than it. So what we can do is we can go to our half height. Let's make that maybe 100. And then we can move our mesh to fit perfectly in there. And now it's okay if the arms are outside because most likely they're going to be inside when the actual animations play. So this works perfectly. Just make sure the height is good and make sure the radius just includes the shoulders like it does here. All right, so the next thing is in our mesh again on the details panel. As you can see here, we have animation mode and we're going to use animation blueprint since that's what we just set up. And then we have our anim class. This is where we're going to actually put in our blueprint. So we're going to look up whatever you named it. So I named mine the boss. And so there we go. And as you can see, it automatically goes to the default idle state. So now if we go to our map, you can see that we have our character in the game now. And the animation blueprint is connected. So if we move, the moving animation is working. Now, right now it looks a little goofy just because the character speed is different than the animation speed. So I'll show you how to fix that in a second, but I just want to show everything's working. So you also have our blend speed. So as you can see, if I'm barely moving, he'll go into like a little walk. Sorry, my controller's a little sensitive, so it's hard to see. But as you can see, he's doing, yeah, there you go. Okay, he did a little walk, and now he's doing a jog. And now if we go, he'll do the full animation. We also have the jump working, which the jump, again, the animations from Mixamo for jumping aren't very good, so it looks a little goofy. But we have our jump animation. So as you can see here, if we fall, it'll also play that animation. So we have all of that set up, ready to go. So if you are getting the same thing as me, is where the walk looks a little goofy because the animation is a different speed than your walk speed. There's two different things you can do. One is just to make your walk speed slower to match the animation, but you really don't want to do that because you shouldn't let the animation dictate your gameplay. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to go to our animation blueprint. So you open our blend space, and then we just want to find the animation. You could also open it just from like the actual content browser. I'm going to get this fast animation here. And so as you can see, there's this rate scale that we can mess with. So let's make it twice as fast. And it looks a little goofy, so maybe not that fast, maybe like 1.5. That looks a little bit more natural. So now if we go into our thing here, yeah, it looks a little better. And it might be a little quick, so let's go here. And again, this will depend on your character, so 1.5 or whatever we end up on might not work for you, but just keep messing with that play rate until it looks good for you. So that looks a lot better for me. It looks like he's running about the same speed, so that's good for me. Again, my animations are probably not going to be as high quality as yours unless you're also testing out using Mixamo. So mine might look a little goofy, but yours will look better if the animations are done better. All right, so that is the animation blueprint. The next thing that I'm going to go over is animation montages, which is basically how we're going to play animations that are not within the state. Inside of my character blueprint, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, make a keyboard command. I'm just going to show a general example, but this can be used for a lot of things. I'm going to show an example of an attack. So I'm just going to get a key. I'm going to get the X key. And what I'm going to go here is I'm going to drag off of this. I'm going to go ahead and just for this example, I'm going to deactivate character movement. So if you play animation montage, most likely it's not going to be a moving one unless you animate it to be a moving one. But I'm just going to do this for now. So I'm going to deactivate character movement. I am then going to play animation montage. Right there, play anim montage. I'll set that up in a second. And you see this gives you return value, and this returns the length of the animation in seconds. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a delay, and I'm going to plug that in here. Now, a good thing to account for, just for edge cases, is to actually add a little bit to it. So I'm going to add like 0.25 just as a little edge case, because the length of the animation might be slightly, this return value might be slightly less than you need it to be, and this is just good to account for edge cases. So I'd add this right here and then have the delay, and then we can activate our character movement after this delay. And we're activating that right there. All right, so let's actually go to the animation montage here. So as you can see, once it's selected an asset, but it says we don't have any animation montages. And you might think that's weird because we have a bunch of animations, but animation montage is slightly different than animation. So what we're going to do is we're going to go here. We're going to go into our animations. We're going to go to this punch. So I have like this little attack animation. It's going to look like this. And if we right click, we can go to create. And you can create a composite or a pose asset, but we want animation montage. And so you can just, name this. I like to put AM for animation montage and then name this, punch or attack or something like that. Now this is basically just going to be the exact same thing. It just has a little bit different data than a typical animation, and it's a little bit more flexible in when it can be called, which is why you need to do an animation montage. So if we go here, now this will be selected. And then if we go to our character, I hit X, he's going to play this punch animation. Now, if this is not working for you, just a reminder, make sure that in your animation state, you have this default slot, because this is actually what happens when we do it. Which I guess I can show you that by using another one of the tools. So similarly to the last video I did about debugging, and you can select this specific thing to check. If we go here, you can see that we have the same thing where we have no debug object. We can select the debug object of our character. So it's always going to be in this little arrow. So go to this arrow. You can go down here and you can select this one. And so let me just have this free floating here. And so this is a good way to debug your animation blueprint if it's not working well. So I press play here. We can see that those little white dots are going to the pose output. And you see if I'm moving around here, we're getting that. But if I hit X, you'll notice that the state machine stops. That is because we're using the default slot in that moment. Now we can do other things with this. So, we can check everything. So here we have all of our different states. And if we go in here, one second, that might be a little hard to see for y'all. All right, and we can use it for this as well. So as you can see, it goes to moving, and it's going to select whatever we're doing with that little pink variable. So if I jump, you can see it's going through all of those and how it's connecting. And we can see the transitions are also highlighting for a little bit, and that also like a tannish, pinkish tone. And so you can use this for debugging your animation blueprint, similar to how you would use it to debug your regular blueprints. So the final thing I want to show you guys is how to make a blueprint that can change the animation state of your character. So let's say you want to have a cutscene or something. So when a player gets to a certain zone, they play a certain animation or something like that. So I'm just going to put this here. You would maybe put it in a different place, but just for simplicity, I'm going to make an actor. I'm going to get it here. This is going to be an actor blueprint. We're going to call this BP underscore cutscene, something like that. And so I'm just going to add a box collision. Just going to add that, call it animation box. Then we're going to say on event begin play or event overlap. We're going to get our other actor. We're going to say has tag. And so we're going to get the tag of whatever character we want. So for me, it's player. The way that you can check that is to go here, go to class defaults, type in tags. As you can see, there's one here. If you need to add a tag because you don't have one, you can press this little plus and then type in whatever you want. So just make sure you have that, which I went over that in my need to know nodes video. So hopefully you already have set that up if you've been following along with all my tutorials, but if not, that's okay. So if we go here, we're going to have a branch. And so we're just going to check to make sure that the character inside is the player character because of this tag check. And what we're going to do is we're then just going to get player character. And then we are just going to cast to third person character. You could also do an event begin play get actor of class and make that a variable. You could also do an event begin play get actor of class and make it a variable like I've shown in other videos. But for this, I'm just going to do a cast because it's a very simple thing. And then from here, what we can do is off here, we can play animation montage. However, we're also going to want to do the same thing that I just forgot was we're going to want to get character movement. We're going to want to deactivate that. And we're going to do the same thing where we have the delay. And then we're going to activate our character movement after the delay. And we need an animation montage. So for me, I got this fun little dance here. So I'm just going to do the same thing. Create animation montage, am underscore dance. And another thing that you can do, like if you want to make it to where, you can use the same blueprint for a bunch of stuff, you could also make this a variable. So promote this to a variable, make it an animation montage. and then you can just make it instance editable and expose on spawn. That's just gonna let you change what kind of animation montage you're playing per instance of this little blueprint. That way you don't have to make a blueprint for every single cutscene or animation that you want. So you can do that if you want, or you can just have the single one as well. So my default is dance. So then I'm just going to, so this is all done now. I'm just going to drag this into the scene. And then all you have to do is just size it to be, however big you want. I'm going to say, here, and then you can place it wherever you want in the scene. I'm just going to place it right in front of my character just for this example. But you'd probably want to make it, bigger, or make it to where the player has to go through it if you want this to be a mandatory cutscene, of course. This is just for an example purpose. And then the thing I was saying over here is if you look at the default here, we have our animation montage, and we could make it whatever we want. That way you can set up a cutscene for, anything. So if I press play, as you can see, I walk forward, and then I just start to do this little dance. And I cannot move while he's doing the dance because this cutscene is playing. Now, of course, it's a very simplistic system. You'd probably want to have, a different camera than just, and as you can see, I immediately go back into the thing. But, that's probably just for, a super, super basic kind of cutscene. You probably want to have like a camera actor in there that you change to, and a bunch of different stuff like that. For the purpose of the video, we're just going to end it there. If there's a lot of interest for me to make a video about how to make more complicated cutscenes, I can do that. For now, I think that's going to do it for this video. That's going to do it for this video. Just wanted to make a video that goes over the animation blueprint for Unreal. There are a lot of great videos on YouTube that go over it, but I think that a lot of them miss some really important tools for you. So I just wanted to give you a very long, very in-depth explanation of how you can use the animation blueprint to create whatever kind of animation system that you want. Now, of course, I didn't show you how to set up every possible state you could need for the animation blueprint and the state machine. Generally wanted to give you the tools so that you'll be able to make whatever thing you want as long as you can figure out the logic for it. So that's it, and I hope that you learned a lot about animation blueprints in Unreal Engine 5.